What if one of the hardest decisions an empath ever makes has nothing to do with strangers, toxic partners, or manipulative coworkers? What if the hardest decision involves family, the very people society tells us we're supposed to love unconditionally? The people we're told should always come first. The people we're expected to forgive, understand, and remain loyal to no matter what. For many empaths, this creates a painful inner conflict, because empaths are often wired to see the good in people, to understand motives, to recognize wounds beneath behavior, to give second chances, third chances, sometimes even 20th chances. They become experts at understanding why people behave the way they do, why someone is angry, why someone is controlling, why someone is emotionally unavailable, why someone lashes out, why someone struggles to communicate. And while this gift can create tremendous compassion, it can also become a burden, because understanding someone is not the same as being safe with them. Yet many empaths spend years confusing the two. They believe that if they understand enough, love enough, forgive enough, or sacrifice enough, eventually the relationship will become healthy. Eventually the criticism will stop. Eventually the manipulation will stop. Eventually the emotional wounds will heal. Eventually the family dynamic will change. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes years pass, then decades, and the same painful patterns remain. The same conversations, the same guilt, the same emotional exhaustion, the same feeling that no matter how much you give, it is never enough. This is where a difficult realization begins forming inside many empaths. A realization that feels almost forbidden. A realization that challenges everything they were taught about loyalty, family, and love. The realization is this: being related to someone does not automatically make a relationship healthy. For some people, that statement feels obvious. For empaths, it often feels heartbreaking, because empaths tend to carry enormous amounts of responsibility for other people's emotions, especially within families. From a young age, many empaths become emotional caretakers, not because anyone formally assigns them the role, because they naturally step into it. They become the peacemaker, the listener, the mediator, the problem solver, the one who notices tension before anyone else, the one who tries to keep everyone comfortable, the one who absorbs emotional storms so others don't have to. Over time, this role becomes part of their identity. They begin believing their value comes from what they provide emotionally. If everyone is happy, they feel successful. If someone is upset, they feel responsible. If conflict occurs, they feel obligated to fix it. And this pattern can continue for years, sometimes an entire lifetime. The problem is that emotional caretaking often becomes invisible. Other family members grow accustomed to it. They expect it, depend on it, benefit from it. Meanwhile, the empath quietly pays the price. A price measured in anxiety, exhaustion, stress, self-abandonment, and emotional burnout. What's particularly painful is that many empaths don't recognize the problem immediately, because the behavior feels normal. It feels familiar. It feels like love. After all, they've been doing it for so long. But eventually something begins happening. The empath starts noticing a pattern. They notice that certain family interactions leave them drained, not occasionally, consistently. Every phone call feels heavy. Every gathering feels stressful. Every conversation feels like emotional labor. Instead of feeling supported, they feel depleted. Instead of feeling seen, they feel used. Instead of feeling connected, they feel responsible. This realization can be shocking, because family is supposed to feel different. Family is supposed to feel safe, supportive, nurturing. And when it doesn't, many empaths blame themselves. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm selfish. Maybe I'm overreacting. These thoughts become common, not because they're accurate, because empathy often turns inward. The empath examines themselves before examining the situation. They assume responsibility before considering whether responsibility actually belongs to them. This tendency keeps many people trapped in unhealthy family dynamics far longer than necessary, because self-blame creates endurance. The more responsibility you assign yourself, the longer you tolerate situations that harm you, and tolerance becomes a way of life. The empath tolerates criticism, tolerates disrespect, tolerates guilt, tolerates emotional manipulation, tolerates one-sided relationships, all because they hope things will improve, all because they understand the pain behind the behavior. But eventually, a question emerges, a question that changes everything. What if understanding someone's wounds doesn't require sacrificing your own well-being? That question marks the beginning of a psychological shift, a shift from responsibility to awareness, a shift from guilt to clarity, a shift from survival to self-respect. Many empaths reach this point after experiencing burnout. Not physical burnout, emotional burnout, the kind that develops slowly, quietly, over years, the kind that leaves you feeling exhausted even when nothing dramatic happened. You simply spent too long carrying emotional weight that was never yours. At first, the empath may attempt smaller changes. They set boundaries, communicate more honestly, express their needs, reduce emotional labor, ask for reciprocity. Sometimes these efforts improve relationships. Healthy family members respond, adapt, grow, respect boundaries, but unhealthy dynamics often react differently. Boundaries are interpreted as rejection, self-respect is interpreted as selfishness, distance is interpreted as betrayal. And this is where many empaths face one of the most painful experiences of all. The realization that some people only liked the version of them that had no boundaries. Think about that for a moment. Not the real you, the accommodating you, the available you, the endlessly forgiving you. The version that never said no. The version that never challenged unhealthy behavior. The version that always absorbed the impact. When boundaries appear, the relationship changes. Not because the empath became difficult, because the dynamic became different. And different can feel threatening to people who benefited from the old arrangement. This often creates guilt, enormous guilt, because family relationships carry powerful social expectations. People are taught that family should always come first, that loyalty should be unconditional, that distance is wrong, that forgiveness is mandatory, that maintaining contact is always the correct choice. These messages sound noble, and sometimes they are, but they become dangerous when applied without nuance, because not every family dynamic is healthy, not every relationship is safe, not every connection supports growth, and pretending otherwise helps no one. The empath begins realizing something important. Love and access are not the same thing. You can love someone and still need distance. You can care about someone and still need boundaries. You can understand someone's pain and still refuse to participate in harmful patterns. This distinction is incredibly difficult for many empaths to accept, because they spent years believing love required unlimited availability, unlimited patience, unlimited sacrifice, unlimited access. But healthy love doesn't require self-destruction. Healthy love allows room for self-respect. Healthy love allows room for boundaries. Healthy love allows room for emotional safety. The moment an empath begins understanding this, their perspective starts changing. Family is no longer viewed through obligation alone. It's viewed through reality. How do I actually feel after interacting with this person? How does this relationship affect my mental health? Does this connection support growth or hinder it? Am I being loved for who I am or for what I provide? These questions create clarity, and clarity can be uncomfortable because clarity often reveals truths we spent years avoiding. Truths about patterns, truths about expectations, truths about relationships that were never as healthy as we hoped. Yet clarity also creates freedom. The freedom to make conscious choices, the freedom to prioritize emotional well-being, the freedom to stop carrying responsibility for everyone else's happiness. And for many empaths, that freedom eventually leads to a decision they never imagined making, a decision that outsiders often misunderstand, a decision rooted not in hatred, not in revenge, not in bitterness, but in self-preservation. The decision to create distance, and what happens psychologically after an empath chooses that distance, is something few people truly understand, because the relief they feel is only the beginning of a much deeper journey. A journey involving grief, identity, healing, and a surprising discovery about what family really means. And that's exactly where our story continues. Because what happens after an empath creates distance from family is rarely what they expect. Most people imagine the decision itself is the hardest part, the difficult conversation, the boundary, the reduced contact, the physical separation. But for many empaths, the real challenge begins afterward, because distance creates silence. And silence has a way of revealing things that constant interaction keeps hidden. For years, many empaths are so busy managing family dynamics that they never fully hear themselves. Their attention is directed outward, toward other people's emotions, other people's needs, other people's expectations, other people's crises. The moment distance appears, something unusual happens. That constant noise begins fading, and beneath it, the empath discovers something they haven't heard clearly in a very long time. Their own voice. At first, this can feel strange, even uncomfortable, because many empaths have spent years defining themselves through service, through support, through emotional caretaking. When those responsibilities suddenly decrease, an unexpected question emerges. Who am I when I'm not fixing everyone else's problems? That question can feel unsettling, because identity is powerful, and many empaths unconsciously build their identity around being needed, being helpful, being available, being the one who understands, being the one who absorbs, being the one who sacrifices. When distance removes those familiar roles, a kind of psychological withdrawal can occur. Not because the empath misses the dysfunction, because the dysfunction was familiar. Human beings often confuse familiarity with safety. Even painful patterns can feel comfortable when they've existed for years, sometimes decades. This is why many empaths experience guilt almost immediately after creating distance, even when the decision was healthy, even when the relationship was damaging, even when boundaries were necessary. The guilt arrives anyway. And it often sounds like this. Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I should try harder. Maybe they're right about me. Maybe I'm abandoning them. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe things weren't that bad. Notice something important. The empath begins questioning themselves again. This happens because guilt frequently survives longer than unhealthy relationships. The emotional conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. The messages learned throughout childhood don't vanish instantly. If someone spent years believing their worth depended on keeping everyone happy, then choosing themselves can initially feel wrong. Not because it is wrong, because it's unfamiliar, and unfamiliar experiences often trigger anxiety. Many empaths mistake this anxiety for evidence that they made the wrong decision. But anxiety is not always a warning sign. Sometimes it's evidence that you're doing something new, something healthier, something necessary. One of the most significant psychological shifts occurs when the empath realizes they are no longer constantly anticipating emotional storms. For years, many empaths become hypervigilant. They monitor moods, monitor tones of voice, monitor facial expressions, monitor tensions, monitor conflict. Their nervous system becomes trained to scan for potential problems. This adaptation often develops for survival, especially in unpredictable family environments. The empath learns to detect danger early, to prevent conflict, to maintain peace, to protect relationships. The problem is that hypervigilance eventually becomes exhausting. Imagine carrying an invisible alarm system 24 hours a day, always listening, always watching, always preparing. Eventually, the body pays a price. The mind pays a price. The spirit pays a price. Distance often interrupts this cycle, not immediately, but gradually. The empath notices something surprising. They sleep better, think more clearly, feel calmer, experience less anxiety, laugh more easily, feel lighter. At first, this relief can actually create more guilt, because part of them wonders, why do I feel better after creating distance? Shouldn't I feel worse? This realization can be deeply revealing, because emotional relief often tells us something important about the environment we left behind. Not always, but often. The body frequently recognizes unhealthy situations long before the mind fully accepts them. Another fascinating change begins occurring during this period. The empath starts rediscovering personal preferences. This may sound insignificant, but it's actually profound. Many people emerging from unhealthy family dynamics realize they spent years adapting, years adjusting, years accommodating, years prioritizing other people's needs above their own. As a result, they lose touch with themselves. What do I enjoy? What do I believe? What do I want? What makes me happy? These questions become important again. And for some empaths, answering them feels like meeting themselves for the first time. They discover interests they neglected, dreams they postponed, goals they abandoned, parts of their personality that were suppressed. The distance creates space, and space allows identity to grow. But healing is rarely linear. There are moments of progress, moments of doubt, moments of peace, moments of grief, because creating distance from family often involves mourning, not only the relationship, the hope attached to the relationship. This distinction matters. Many empaths are not grieving what actually existed. They're grieving what they hoped would exist. The loving parent who never appeared, the supportive sibling who never changed, the emotionally safe family environment that never materialized, the relationship they kept believing might emerge one day. Letting go of that hope can be heartbreaking because hope keeps people connected. Hope encourages patience, forgiveness, endurance. Hope whispers, maybe next time will be different, maybe next year, maybe after this conversation, maybe after this crisis, maybe after this apology. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore, and accepting reality often requires grieving fantasy. This grief is not weakness, it's part of healing. In fact, many therapists recognize grief as a necessary stage of recovery, because before something can be released, it must first be acknowledged. The empath must acknowledge what was lost, what was missing, what never happened. Only then can genuine acceptance begin. One of the most liberating moments occurs when the empath understands a difficult truth. Love cannot heal a relationship by itself. This realization challenges years of conditioning. Many empaths believe that if they love hard enough, understand deeply enough, forgive generously enough, eventually things will improve. But healthy relationships require participation from both sides. Mutual effort, mutual respect, mutual accountability, mutual care. One person's love cannot compensate for another person's unwillingness, and accepting this truth often changes everything because it removes an impossible burden. The burden of fixing relationships alone, the burden of saving people who don't want to change, the burden of carrying emotional responsibilities that never belonged to them. With that burden gone, something remarkable happens. Energy returns, not all at once. Gradually, the energy previously spent managing dysfunction becomes available again. Available for creativity, for friendships, for growth, for healing, for meaningful relationships, for life itself. This is where many empaths make another surprising discovery. Family is not always limited to biology. Sometimes family is chosen. People often misunderstand this statement. Chosen family does not replace biological family. Rather, it expands the definition. Chosen family consists of people who provide emotional safety, mutual respect, authenticity, support, trust, people who celebrate your growth instead of resenting it, people who respect your boundaries instead of challenging them, people who value your well-being instead of exploiting your empathy. For many empaths, finding these relationships becomes transformative because they finally experience something they may have lacked for years. Reciprocity. A relationship where care flows both directions. A relationship where support is mutual. A relationship where they don't have to earn love through sacrifice. A relationship where they can simply exist and be valued. This experience often reshapes their entire understanding of connection. They begin realizing healthy relationships feel different. There's less anxiety, less confusion, less emotional exhaustion, less walking on eggshells, more trust, more honesty, more consistency, more peace. Perhaps the greatest psychological transformation occurs when the empath stops measuring their worth through usefulness. For years, many empaths believe they must provide something to deserve love, support, guidance, understanding, solutions, emotional labor. But healing teaches a different lesson. Worth is not earned through self-sacrifice. Worth is inherent. You are valuable because you exist, not because you fix, not because you rescue, not because you absorb pain, not because you carry everyone else's burdens. This realization is life-changing because it allows relationships to become choices rather than obligations. The empath no longer stays because they feel trapped. They stay because the relationship is healthy. They no longer give because they're afraid. They give because they genuinely want to. They no longer sacrifice themselves to maintain connection. They maintain connection without sacrificing themselves. That distinction changes everything. Years later, many empaths look back on the decision to create distance with a completely different perspective. What once felt like abandonment now feels like protection. What once felt selfish now feels necessary. What once felt impossible now feels obvious. Not because they stopped caring, because they finally started caring about themselves too. And that's the part many people fail to understand. Distance is not always about rejecting others. Sometimes it's about reconnecting with yourself. Sometimes it's about creating enough space to hear your own needs, your own feelings, your own truth. Sometimes it's about breaking patterns that have existed for generations. Sometimes it's about choosing health over familiarity, peace over chaos, reality over hope, growth over guilt. And while that journey is never easy, it often leads to something many empaths have been searching for their entire lives. Not perfection, not revenge, not validation, peace. The kind of peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself. The kind of peace that comes from living in alignment with your values. The kind of peace that comes from understanding that compassion and boundaries can coexist, that love and distance can coexist, that empathy and self-respect can coexist. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. The psychology of empaths who choose distance from family is not a story about rejection. It's a story about awakening, a story about recognizing that understanding someone's pain does not require living inside it, a story about learning that loyalty should never demand self-destruction, a story about discovering that protecting your peace is not selfish. It's necessary, because the moment an empath finally understands that truth, something extraordinary happens. They stop abandoning themselves for the comfort of others, and from that moment forward, every relationship in their life begins to change.